a Ford 292Y block. It's out of my 1955 Ford Thunderbird. It's out of the car for a rebuild, and while waiting for parts, I've been trying to learn everything I can about these old engines. If you have one of these, thinking about rebuilding one, or maybe put it in a hot rod project, you're going to want to watch this video. The more people I talk to and the more research I do, I keep running into this lore that these things have an oiling issue. Since I'm skeptical of just about everything I hear the first time, I'm going to follow the oil through this engine. Look at the history and assembly mistakes that are commonly made when assembling these, and also look at some old hot rodder modifications that should improve oiling long term. With the engine all apart and everything cleaned up, it's a perfect time to do some mock-ups and follow the oil. Let's jump right into it. So I got the engine upside down in the stand here, and I think the best way to get started here is to just follow the oil through the engine and see where it leads us. Here we got the oil pickup in the bottom of the pan. It's basically just an upside down cup with a big screen on it. Here we have it in the position it normally lives in. So the oil just gets picked up from the sump, goes out this tube, and into the oil pump. Here's the engine in the stand upside down, just to show what it looks like when the pan's installed properly. Like I said, the oil just comes from the pan into the oil pump. Once it enters the pump, it's under pressure, goes out this hole and into the main oil galley. And if the pressure is too high, the pressure relief valve will open, allowing pressure to be pushed into the low pressure side. Pulling the pump off, we can see the main passage that the shaft that drives the distributor and the oil pump runs. That runs off the cam and turns the oil pump and the distributor. And this one here, this passage, does a right turn and goes right in to feed the oil filter. So this is where the oil filter goes. Just a reminder, we're right back by the oil pump. So the oil turned, made a right turn, and went in here, and this feeds the oil filter. It goes through the oil filter, gets filtered, and runs into this main oil galley here. We'll get a look at it from the other side. This is the engine upside down, and we're looking at the driver's side cylinder bank. This is where that oil comes in and feeds this whole galley all along here and is essentially responsible for feeding oil to the whole engine. I'll run a wire in there so we can see where this goes. This is that, like I said, the number 4 main bearing. So here we are. And we can see that wire running through. So that's the oil feeding that main bearing. So what we were just looking at is a little artery that branches off of the main galley and feeds each one of the webs with oil. Not only does it feed the main bearing, but it also feeds the cam. Let's pick on number 3. This is the thrust bearing on this engine. And you can see that that artery branches up to the cam and down to the main bearing. And again, that replicates on every one of the webs in the engine. But wait, there's more. So we're on number 3 here. Again, it's the thrust bearing. And I think you can see on either side there's a bit of a hole there. Number 3 also feeds up to the cylinder head on both sides. Number 5, or the back bearing for the cam, also has a job to do. I don't know if you can see it here, but there's another little branch that goes off of the number 5 bearing and feeds the base of the distributor. I'll flip the engine over so we can see that one. I'll also show you where that hole comes out, that the number 3 cam bearing, where that ends up going into the cylinder head. I flipped the engine around so it's sitting upright again, and I also put the distributor in just so we could have it for reference to see what I was talking about. I'm going to go ahead and pull the distributor out. And here we are looking at where that oil supply comes from for the distributor. It's that back cam bearing we were just looking at. And from there, I guess it just drops down into the bottom of the oil pan. And here's where the oil comes out to feed the cylinder heads. Again, coming from the number 3 cam bearing. We've got one on each side. Right there. And from that hole that exits on the top of the deck, it goes on this side of this little trough on the cylinder head, shoots over and goes up this hole into the rocker arms. And on the top of the heads, it comes out on the middle right. Here we are looking at the bottom of the rocker shaft, and you can see these ones don't have a hole to go into the rocker shaft. But when we get to that one right there, that's how the oil gets in and floods the rocker shaft. Each rocker is fed by a hole in the rocker shaft. And the holes in the rocker feed the push rod, and then it also leaks out down onto the top of the valve. Hey, future me here, working on the rockers, and I figured this would be good to throw into the video. As you can see here, this is the side that the return tube goes into to help index all of the other rocker stands. Always goes on the right hand side. Let's flip this thing over and look at what it gets up to on the side. You can't see anything. So there we go. We can see where that supply right there goes into the rocker shaft and floods it. And here's where it leaks out onto all the rockers. And on each side, there is an overflow tube. It's always on the right hand side, and that allows excess oil to drain back. Continuing on with the right-hand side, or the passenger, there's also a spot here on each side for the oil to drain back into the valley. And they kind of got a cool little dam built up here for the oil to flow back in. Both spots drain in, they come down this dam, and they drain back into the front timing set. Here we are on the left side, or the driver's side. We got the same return holes on each side, along with the overflow tube that goes down with the push rod. And those look like they will form a little river that goes down, and I'm guessing probably helps lubricate the timing gear where the cam meshes with the distributor. I'm guessing that probably also gets enough just from the splash in the valley. Thought I would also include the lifters on this. So what we have here is oil is squirting out of the back of the rocker onto the push rod, making its way down and dripping into the cup where the lifter lives, pulling up and making its way around the lifter. I'm sure splash and just fog also contribute. I'm not including the crank and connecting rods in this, but I think we have enough pieces of the puzzle to start putting things together. Here we have the two different versions of camshafts that came in the Y block throughout the years. You'll notice the one major difference between the two is the middle cam journal. One has a groove and one doesn't. My understanding is that Ford started off with the cross-drilled version. Essentially, there's two holes drilled into the camshaft, and they literally go straight through. Later on, they created the grooved version, and then they kind of went back and forth throughout the years. With this groove-style cam, as the bearing wears, it can end up leaving a ridge, which will end up closing off oil flow up to the rockers. Another historically significant thing that happened around this time was the addition of detergents to oils. Late adopters would run non-detergent oil in these engines. And what could happen is if you don't change your oil for a long time, these passages could block up. So if you add in these passages blocking up and that cam bearing wearing down, you're going to have extremely reduced oil going to the heads and up to the rockers. From what I read, I think that was the initial thing that created a bad reputation for these engines. But wait, there's more. So when these cams came out, this was supposed to solve everything, right? Problem was on rebuilds, apparently there was a large batch of aftermarket cams that came out without this groove being deep enough. And what would happen is, of course, you go and you rebuild your engine and you never quite get enough oil to the rockers. Again, just getting a bad reputation. The place I sourced this cam from assures me that this groove is deep enough. If you look really close, there's the initial groove that's cut into it, and then there's another smaller groove. So the initial groove is about 23 thousandths, and if you go to the bottom of the second deeper groove, you're at about 30 thousandths. And to go along with that deepened oil groove, the cam bearings they sent me has a number 3 bearing that's hardened. This will stop it from wearing as fast and or filling in the void left by the oil groove, which would greatly reduce oil supply to the heads. But wait, there's more. Not only was that an issue, but there's also another issue. Clocking of the cam bearings themselves. Remember we had the holes that had to be lined up? If that cam bearing isn't clocked right, it can reduce or cut off oil flow to the heads, which means your rocker shafts aren't going to get the oil they need and can wear prematurely. Again, this just adds to that overall lore of a bad reputation for oiling issues on Y blocks. So we're starting to build a bit of a checklist. Number 1, run decent oil. And number 2, make sure that each cam bearing is indexed to receive oil from its oil supply feed, paying special attention to the middle and rear cam bearings. Number 3, the rear cam bearing, that also has to be indexed so it feeds the distributor drive gear. Number 4, check that the middle cam bearing feeds both of the cylinder heads. Number 5, make sure you're running the right cam bearing with the right cam, and if you have the groove cam, make sure the clearance is deep enough. And number 6, if you can, try to run a hardened middle cam bearing. Honestly, I think if you do all that, you're good. Next, let's take a look at one of the modifications that hot rodders have been doing since this engine came out. There's quite a few exotic things you can do to improve oiling on this engine, but I think pressurizing the rockers is a great improvement over stock. Okay, so let's take a look at what pressurizing the rocker shafts is actually all about. So if we remember, oil comes in on this rocker stand right here from the bottom of the head up into the shaft, and essentially it fills the whole thing with oil. Once it's filled, it goes into this overflow tube and back into the valley. Just to take a mental note, the holes that give oil to each one of the rockers is on the bottom of the shaft. When you're assembling the stands on the rocker shaft, you actually use the overflow tube to index the hole in the rocker shaft with the rocker shaft stand. Let's get a look at that. See how far that sticks down in? There's a hole right there that goes into the rocker shaft, and that's how it gets indexed against all of the other stands. It essentially lines everything up. So once you get this drilled and tapped, you essentially make a little shoulder on a bolt that'll go through into that hole and help keep it indexed. And that effectively blocks off the overflow tube and pressurizes the whole rocker shaft. Let's kind of walk through what's happening there. So again, the oil comes in, fills the rocker shaft. This side over here is essentially deadheaded, except for what is dripping through each one of the rockers as it's moving. This side, overflow, is going in here and back into the valley. So we got room for sediment to build up in here over time. And the rockers, they're not pressurized. They're literally just riding on whatever's dripping through. So if we close this off, we're essentially going to be sending more pressurized oil under each one of these rockers, lubricating them, as well as flushing out the whole rocker under pressure. So like I said, oil takes the flow of least resistance. I'm kind of liking this idea. One of the concerns I've seen is that the valves will end up being immersed in oil. One of the videos I've seen from Tim McMasters, he's called the Y-Block guy, so I think he might know a little bit about what he's talking about. He's been around working on these things for a long time, and he's got a video of the engine running, and it's not doing that. It's going back through the returns on each side and not having a problem like that. I'm not seeing any downsides to this. Builders have been doing this mod on this engine for years, and I've not seen one bit of evidence that it causes any negative problems. What I do see happening is the inside of this rocker shaft staying cleaner. And 2, putting more pressure or more oil pressure between the rocker shaft and these rockers, which I don't think is going to be a bad thing. I think we're going to reduce wear and increase longevity. Another concern I've seen is that folks seem to think that both the distributor drive gear and the front timing set isn't going to be oiled because these tubes are no longer squirting oil on them. I don't think they realize that these two holes, the one with where the push rod comes through and this return tube, end up at the same place on both sides of the head. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to run our wire down this hole. Let's see where it ends up. So there's our wire going down that return tube. And here it comes out. Look at that. Feeding right into that nice little dam, that trough that feeds back into the timing set. And here we are at the back of the engine. Same thing. That return tube Comes out at about the same spot that that oil return tube was pointing at. Not to mention there's probably enough splash from the crank spinning around that these gears are getting more than enough oil just from that. And don't forget, we're feeding oil to the bottom of the distributor into that bushing hole. Like I said, I'm sold. I'm going to start doing the other rocker shaft. There's a couple more modifications that they recommend too, and we can take a look at that next. Before I pull this rocker stand off the shaft, I'm going to mark it just so I remember which one we're working with and which way it goes. I've had these apart a million times, so I'm getting pretty good at it. Also knowing how to get my vise set just right. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pull off that cotter pin. Remove the washers and the rocker. And one thing I noticed pretty quickly is that you squeeze these rocker stands opposite of the way the bolts goes just a little bit. They come off nice and easy off the shaft. And another note, while the drain tube can be used to clock the rocker shaft, it's not what holds it in place. The rocker stands actually grab the shaft and keep it from rotating once it's cinched down with the bolts. So here we have a 5/16 by 18 tap. I didn't pre-drill this. I'll do my best to keep everything square and perpendicular. And since I didn't really mention it in the video, I don't really want to get flamed in the comments, deburring and making sure all the chips are gone. On final assembly, I think I will be putting a little bit of Loctite on these bolts. All the way through. Clean up the burr on the top. Gotta clean up the burr on the bottom too, but let's just check if this fits. Here we go. Looks like I got it fairly square. Yep. There you can see the bolt goes all the way through. Seems to be decently square. I'm going to go clean up the burr on the bottom here, and then we're going to do one more modification that Tim McMasters recommends, the Y-block guy. So what I'm going to do next is put a small groove in the top of the rocker stand, and what that's going to allow is any trapped air to escape out of the rocker shaft. So there you can see we got about a 20 thousandths, I would guess, a little groove on both sides. And yeah, oil is going to flow out of that a little bit, but it'll also let any air that would be trapped in the rocker shaft out. This next modification essentially helps the oil disperse across the whole face of the rocker. It just helps oil get to where it needs to go. I'm just using a flex shaft motor and a fiber disc to make a partial groove across the bearing face. You don't want to go all the way across. I'm just going halfway into each wear area. I've got 2 rocker shafts on order, so for me, this is just practice. But I got a whole vid coming out on rocker shaft rebuild. Keep an eye out for it. Here I am showing off the final product. Don't forget, you only want to do the spots that the rockers will be rotating on. And also, don't forget to clean up every last bit of grinding dust. I don't have a lathe, so here I am using a grinding stone just to clean up the threads, to grind them off so that the end of the bolt will index into the rocker shaft. I'm going with the logic that you want enough clearance so that air can escape out that groove that we made. Here we are checking fitment. Everything seemed to turn out okay. Looks like there will be more than enough stick out into the rocker shaft. And here we are going back together. Here we are. I just wanted to get an illustration of how you clock the shaft to the rocker stand. Run the bolt down, and I sort of just shake it back and forth a little bit just to get it to slide into the pocket. And that's it. There is the final product. We'll save final assembly and the rocker shaft rebuild for another video. I am going to wrap on this one though. Thanks for coming along. I hope you liked the video, and if you liked it, please subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Have a good one. We'll see you in about a week for another video.